teaching experience and more than 7 years of research experience. Currently, he is working as a senior scientist at CSIR Siri Pilani. His research area is computer vision, digital image processing, machine learning, AI, deep learning. Welcome you, sir. Dheeraj, sir.
Hello, Vijay,
Over to you,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah. So, shall I start?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. Okay. Just a minute. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Is it visible in full screen mode or the partial view is visible?
Yes, sir. It's visible in full screen mode.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. So, today's lecture will be related to deep learning for real-time computer vision applications. So it will be a brief lecture of around 1.5 hour duration, and the rest 30 or 20 minutes probably we will leave for the discussions or any question answers, which probably you have after this lecture session. So first I will start with the brief introduction regarding my institute and the type of research activities we have been involved with, and then we go to the usual lecture content. So my institute belongs to one parent organization, which we call as CSIR, that is the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. So it is a parent organization which is having under its umbrella around 37 research laboratories distributed across the nation, right? And the expertise across the whole CSIR involves the active manpower of around 3,500 active scientists and around 4,000 technical manpower. CSIR covers a wide spectrum of science and technology, and in practice, it covers majorly all the scientific disciplines, some of them targeted to the local social domain, and some may be related to the security purpose also. So the task is to provide technological intervention in many areas concerning the societal efforts, which includes the environment, health, drinking water, and all. So this is a little bit about CSIR. And now one slide related to my organization, that is CSIR CIRI, which we popularly call as CIRI. So it is a research institute which was started in year 1953 by our first Prime Minister, and currently there are around 100 scientists working in it, along with the aid of around 200 technical and support staff. So CIRI, as the name specifies, is Central Electronics Engineering Research Institute. So broadly, we try to cover all the evolving research domains related to the electronic science. So if you can look upon, you will find the research areas indicate the different groups in which the different people are working. The one is the intelligent systems group. Another one is the microsystem packaging group. Then semiconductor device fabrication, societal electronics, vacuum electronic device design, and vacuum electronics device development. So this is the list of different groups or the different areas in which the research is currently pursued in the CIRI. Right. So now I will start with the topic of today's lecture, that is the computer vision. So what is computer vision? Computer vision is nothing but the science of understanding the image and videos, right? So as the name itself specifies, vision means something which we can see upon. So normally when we see something, we can visualize it in the form of images or in the form of videos. So when that vision is attached to a computer, which is a machine, we call it to be a computer vision. So what is the aim of that? The aim of that is to imitate the functionality of human eye and brain, because we always try to correlate the intelligence or the computation with respect to the human brain, right? So what are the important sensory inputs to the human brain? The most of the data usually comes from the brain to the brain in the form of the eye data, right? So we have two sensors on the frontal part of our face. We call them as eye. So basically, these are the two specific inputs which we get, and based on the content sensing, our brain try to analyze the scene understanding. So we will try to replicate the similar type of understanding, similar type of cognizance through some machine, and we correlate it in the terms of computer vision applications. So what we usually expect in the form of a computer application, computer vision application, we can expect the actions such as recognizing an animal, describing a view, differentiating among visible objects. So basically, all these are very basic things which we usually do in our day-to-day life. But when these things we try to translate to a computer or a machine, a lot of research got involved into realizing these basic things which we don't do any effort in accomplishing that thing. So before the 2012 or 2010, you can specifically say not much research was done in the field of advancement in related to computer vision. Only when the convolution neural networks specifically came into picture, the majority of the advancement took place, right? So we can say that the majority of the technology advancement which we can see now around are basically happened after the advancement of CNNs. So basically, CNNs are the driving force behind the popularity of the computer vision. Now, the computer vision along itself doesn't be able to do all these advancement. There must be some computational ability behind this thing. So that computational ability should be intelligent enough. So that intelligent computation capability to the computer vision applications is provided through the development of deep learning based algorithms. So we can later on in slides also we will see that deep learning is basically a subset of machine learning technique which teaches computer to do what comes naturally to human eye. What comes naturally to human means we don't put effort in analyzing the content of the view. Whenever we see something, we always find the content comes naturally to us, right? We don't put any effort in analyzing that thing, means what is inside that thing. But in terms of computer vision, this computation of the relevant content from that view is basically accomplished through some intelligent algorithm development. So there are multiple domains in that we are going to cover in today's lecture. So these are the contents of today's lecture. The first is the impact of computer vision in modern day human life. So this is a brief slide which you all are aware of the different things which we find in today's life possible through the computer vision development. The first you can see content on the top left side is Google Assistant, which we find in our mobile applications. So basically that helps us in analyzing the audio input. Means just by using the audio data, the Google Assistant will be able to identify what that particular task needs to be done. The another is the driving application, where it is the you can say automated mode of driver, which is currently targeted. Then the you can say this thing is related to the marketing part, where a lot of industries which are related to the computer domain, they will use the computer vision developments to target the user feedback and the emojis, which will basically tell us the mood of the user. Then in the music industry also, there happens to be so much advancement which happens through the computer vision itself. Then comes the advertising, then gaming, then navigation part, then smart home, then security. So all these basically tells you the different applications of computer vision with respect to the different applications. And in most of all these cases, you will find the development happens basically when the deep learning type of algorithms got into place. Right. So now I will show you a picture of the Times Square. So when we all look at this picture, what we find is that there is a voluminous amount of content in this, right? So, but when we look, we will try to analyze the theme of this picture, that what is actually happening in this picture. But when we feed the same picture to an algorithm, we expect the same type of analysis from that algorithm also, but it is not possible. Let's say if we see this picture just for a few seconds, what we will find, this picture represents the view of a scene, right, where there are so much hoardings which basically advertise few products. That is one thing which we can visualize. Second, it also shows the transit of the vehicles, right? It also shows there are few pedestrians also. There are few buildings behind that. There are few traffic signs also. So think of the situation where the same type of analysis needs to be done with the help of algorithms. So that is only possible if we will try to find out the specific regions from this image which have the specific content in them, right? Unless until we are able to localize the region where that specific information is present in this image, we are not able to identify the content of the data, right? So the first basic requirement for any analysis is to find out the region where that information is present. So this comes to us naturally. We are able to focus in a particular region of an image, and then we can find out the content of that data. But if we expect the same type of analysis to be done from an algorithm, obviously few constraints are there which needs to be justified, and after then the analysis can be accomplished. So first we will discuss about brief regarding the different type of computer vision task which we can nowadays target upon. So the first one is the classification task, right? So all these tasks comes under the category, brief category of object recognition. So the first bifurcation in object recognition is a very straightforward, which we consider to be the image classification. So look at the picture of a cat. We know this is a cat, right? But look, take this picture as just an input, and the task is to classify this whole picture into one category. That is image classification. The whole image needs to be classified into a category. That is the only task, right? Putting a label to the complete image. The another task is the localization. We know that there is a content inside that image, and we are not satisfied with just one label of that content. We want to find out where that content is present in that. So that means classification along with the localization. We want to find out the location of that object also inside this. And if we subsequently progress upon, we find that there happens to be a combination of both classification and object localization also that comes under the category of object detection. That if in that localized region of the complete image, if we can assign the whole label also, means earlier we have been labeling the whole image, if we can extend that to that localized region also, that task now becomes the object detection task, right? So now we are actually focusing our interest from the whole image to some localized regions. That is the object detection. And if we can go further downwards, and if we can further, you can say, categorize the content of that localized region also. So the content of localized region can be decided in the form of the pixels which make that region, right? So if we can make a label, if we can assign a label to the individual pixels of that region, then that task can be categorized in the form of a segmentation task also, right? Where the task is to map each pixel instead of that complete bounding box or that block which includes that region. Now the task is to assign the label to each pixel of that. So now becomes the object segmentation. And then segmentation can also be further divided into two categories: semantic segmentation and instance segmentation, based on the way how we want to segment out the individual instances or the category only. So that becomes the, so these are the specific things which we usually do in case of computer vision, because computer vision is mainly related to the analyzing of the content in the form of image and videos. So these are the basic things which we will target in a computer vision. Along with these things, we can extend this functionality to the present domain. That the first thing which relates to the marketing domain is the similarity learning, right? Which we will find nowadays in the e-commerce industry. So what similarity learning is and how it is beneficial to the marketing people, it is the process of learning how two images are similar to each other. So basically it helps in the e-commerce because it depends upon the customer interest. They will try to popularize few of their other products also. So they will try to find a similarity score between the user search and their database. And based on that, they will try to propose few of the other things also which might be of interest to the user also. So this can also be targeted using the computer vision applications where a similarity learning is the problem which we named upon. Then comes the image captioning. Image captioning means assigning a textual based description to the content, right? So if you can see upon the images, normally what we will see that there is a person in this, right? A person is riding a bike. So if we want to you can say classify this image, we can say a human or a person. If we want to categorize it, we require a high bandwidth connection so that our connection will be maintained all the time. If we want to categorize this through the object detection problem, then we can think that a person is there in this particular region of the image. But that description is not the complete description. We want to add more detail to that also. So for that, what we can do, we can take the help of the image captioning, which will basically decide the theme or the content of the data. A person riding a motorcycle on a dirt road, that is the complete description. So it includes the more detailed analysis. So along with the image, there is a text also involved, right? So this is called as the image captioning. Now, as the advancements happens in the technology, so happens in the case of deep learning algorithms also. So nowadays, the you can say recent developments, we call it in the form of generative models. So generative models are a very new class of deep learning type of algorithms, which finds numerous applications in day-to-day life. The first or the basic thing for which, as the name specifies, they can be used to generate synthetic images which exactly look like the real images, right? So why there is a need to generate synthetic images? Because we don't have the data for all the possible instances. So there might be a need where we need to generate the synthetic data. So that is the basic thing which we can accomplish using the generative models. Now, as happens in the case of image, the analysis can be extended to the video data also. So look upon the images which have been shown in this slide. So this is actually a project which we have done. So here what we have done is that we have, instead of working on the image, we have worked on a set of images. So that set of images can be constituted in the form of a video, and the same computer vision type of analysis can be extended from the image to the video part also. When we work upon the computer vision problems, are those you can say problems very simple to target, or there are few inherent issues in dealing with those things? So that comes under the challenges in the computer vision, right? So what comes under the challenge of computer vision? As I have already told, that we being a human are able to analyze the different aspects of the data. Means we can correlate that present data with the past instances and then try to find a similar outcome which might be stored in our database. Intuitively we do this, we don't do it with an effort. So if you see at the images, you will find there are 4 different poses of the same object, that is the cat, right? Now for a computer vision, all these 4 poses present the different type of data. Even the value of the data keeps on changing. So variation in viewpoint is a big problem when we design the computer vision algorithms. All those poses present a different data and may lead to a different category also. For an algorithm, it may be considered as a different category also. There was long back algorithm developed in 2001 that we all know in the form of a Viola-Jones algorithm that was designed for the facial detection part. Now, in that facial detection, there was a big drawback that if we change the orientation of the face, the algorithm's performance will suddenly degrade. Because if we change the orientation, the viewpoint will change. Right? So the algorithm performance changes because that was not robust enough to deal with those changes in the viewpoint. Then another is the difference in illumination. As image can be translated in the form of the pixel intensities. So obviously the change in illumination relates to the change in pixel values also. And if there is a change in pixel values, the content which the algorithms need to analyze, that will also change. Then comes the hidden part of images. We correlate the image content partially also, means we are able to see the complete information in a partial way also. But algorithms since process the whole data as such, so they will try to find the analogy of the whole content, not the partial content. So maybe the analysis will be such that the partial content will lose the meaning with respect to the complete image. So hidden part of the image may pose a problem. Then comes the issue of the background clutter. The foreground may get, you can say, maybe the effect of the foreground may get diminished in the presence of the background information, and we can somehow lose the content as whole. So these are few of the challenges in computer vision. Now, when we deal with the computer vision, as I told in the case of Viola-Jones, the progress happened since 2000s. But earlier, the whatever are the algorithms which you will find described in the literature, they are basically algorithms where the features are handcrafted, right? So basically, the developers think upon the problem themselves and they judiciously decide what type of features they want to extract and how those features are related to that problem only. So they devise ways to extract those problem specific features, and then those ways they are hard coded in the form of some rules. Now those rules can be extended to train data as well as to test data, and then those rules can be used to extract the specific content related information, and hence the rule set definition comes into picture. But as happens in the case of the normal data, in real life scenario, those rules can't be applied everywhere because there happens to be so many changes in the amount of data. Means the type of the content may change, but the category remains same. So those algorithms may not find that much practical application nowadays. So the traditional approaches may remain valid for simpler cases, but as task becomes complex, as so many images comes into picture, the traditional approaches can't be considered as a viable solution for us. So now comes the basic definition of deep learning. Since today we are going to discuss the deep learning, so from where the deep learning comes, deep learning is basically a subset of machine learning, and machine learning itself can be considered as a subset of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a general term, right? General term when we think of a situation where there is a program, there is a machine, there is a situation where the machines, they can think upon the data in an intelligent manner, right? So that can be considered to be the artificial intelligence. The intelligence had been embedded into that particular machine in an artificial manner. That is not the inherent characteristic of that thing. And comes the machine learning. So artificial intelligence is a general term that can be very narrowly made and can be a you can say aware type of thing also, means based on the input that can be made to adapt also. But when we go inside that artificial intelligence domain comes the machine learning. So machine learning means now the machine has been enabled to learn from the data. Now, it is not like that the learning happens on its own. It can be such that there are a few set of ways by which the machine is enabled enough that now it can learn from the data, right? So that comes under the machine learning. In a broader manner, we can say that. Inside that machine learning, deep learning holds its roots. So as in machine learning, we learn from the data, the same thing can be extended, same thing is extended to the deep learning also. But here the learning from the data happens in an intuitive manner, means, right? So it happens on its own. So there defines some ways by which the learning happens from the data on its own. We don't hard craft or handcraft those information extraction from the data. So that is the deep learning. Now, why deep learning is important? If we look upon the graph, what we find is that normally we expect that as the amount of data increases, the performance of the algorithm should also increase accordingly, right? Performance of the algorithm should also increase accordingly. But traditionally in machine learning algorithm, it doesn't happen. After a specific amount of data, the performance becomes stagnant. It no longer further improves. However, in case of deep learning, as the learning improves with the amount of data, so the performance will also becomes more and more generalized in this sense. Now it is able to adapt to more changes in the data. So for the real practical scenario or for the real working applications, we find deep learning to be more relevant. So here I have just mentioned few cases which are practical from the today's life. Like in the case of Facebook, they have a huge success in identifying faces of the photographs of a person. We all are using Facebook, and we find that our faces are getting tagged in the images, no matter who captures them, where they get captured. But everywhere we find that the faces got tagged. Similar type of progress is shown in the form of one linguistic type of recognition that was proposed by Baidu. And in case of Google also, they have used the deep learning type of methodologies to cut their energy needs. So we will find that practically now, why all these three examples I have shown? Because for all these practical application, you will find there happens to be the abundance of data. And even in the presence of that abundance of data, the algorithms will perform in a much better manner. So what was the problem in case of earlier thing execution based algorithms, and what changes we have found in case of deep learning? Deep learning, in case of deep learning based algorithms, the feature extraction happens in a hierarchical manner, right? So what do you mean by hierarchical manner? Hierarchical manner means the native structure of the task is to be constituted by first extracting its constituting elements. Means first we will look upon the underlying features, means what features basically make those structures. Like there is an image, there is an application where we want to target the facial detection application. Means for an input image, now we want to identify the location, or we want to find out the location where a face is present. So now we all know that face consists of few specific features. The features can be eyes, nose, mouth, all these things. So from a frontal face, is it possible to extract those eyes, nose, mouth? It can be considered as a mid-level feature, and then all those eyes, nose, mouth can be further translated in the form of basic features which we can calculate from the input data in the form of lines and edges also. So in this way we can see that in case of deep learning algorithms, the extraction of features happens in a hierarchical manner. The low-level features can be combined in the form of mid-level features. The mid-level features can be further combined in the form of high-level features also. So as we have discussed, that this feature combination or feature merging is now happening in case of deep learning algorithms, but suddenly why there is a huge popularity in case of deep learning algorithm was not that information present earlier. The information was present, but what happens, there were two prime forces which drives the popularity of deep learning algorithms, which were not made earlier possible. What are those? The first thing is the abundance of the data. So since deep learning algorithms intuitively are deep in nature, means they have so many layers to extract those features, so they need huge amount of data. Earlier, those data availability was not there, so the algorithms have not yet that much progress. That is the first requirement, that deep learning was not made popular earlier. The second is the hardware. The abundance of data needs to be processed. Now the processing is to be done on an hardware. So earlier that much computationally efficient hardware was not available, so progress was not that much. And the third is the ease of development, right? So whenever we want to develop an algorithm, we want to find out whether there is an already resource available to help us in developing the algorithms. So there are few libraries or APIs available nowadays in the form of a few frameworks, which helps us to develop the algorithm. So this basically makes the development of techniques to be quite faster. So this is again a sort of comparison in machine learning and deep learning. In case of machine learning, it's not like that everywhere deep learning is required. Depending upon the type of data, depending upon the type of computation available at our hand, we can choose whether the traditional handcrafted feature set is sufficient to go for the task, or we just need the deep learning type of thing. So in case of machine learning, good results we obtain in the form of small data sets. In case of deep learning, comparatively, we need a large amount of data set. In case of machine learning, the model is quite fastly trained. However, in case of deep learning, large amount of time requirement is there. In case of machine learning, since the feature extraction is to be done manually, so we have to try with different type of feature extraction methods, and then the different classifier combinations also needs to be tried upon. However, in case of deep learning, it is an end-to-end training, so all the feature extraction as well as the classification is to be done in one go. For the present domain, if there is a huge amount of data available, we can consider the deep learning to be better suited. For the other cases, the machine learning can be considered as a better option. So this is the ecosystem which nowadays drives the deep learning development. In the case of software as well as hardware, now we have an array of you can say options available through which we can develop the deep learning algorithms. So for those who want to dive into this field, normally the intuition comes in the form of a way that what is the effect of change in the input? What is the effect on the change in the hyperparameters of a model? So all these things can be easily targeted through some aids which are available nowadays. There is one TensorFlow playground, you can say utility available on the web, through which we can easily look upon and then find out how to change in the how the change in the input leads to change in the output also. So basically it is a sort of a playground for the developer, where we can experiment with different combinations and then try to find out what affects what. Similar to that TensorFlow playground, there is one deep cognition feature set available, where we can you can say develop the deep learning architectures in a plug and drop type of thing. We just plug up one deep learning layer and then place it in a you can say playground type of fashion, and then we connect all these. So basically this is for the new type of naive type of developers who want to experiment with the different deep learning architectures. Now, this is just the, you can say, introductory part regarding the deep learning. First, after this, I also want to give a brief regarding the perceptron and ANN, because these are the basic computation elements which drives the whole deep learning architecture scenario. So I quickly go through this all, that in case of any deep learning architecture, there happens to be one computation element, and that computation element basically originates from the neural networks, and neural networks starts their development from the one computation unit, which we call as a perceptron. So perceptron can be considered as a single neuron. So think of the simplest scenario where there is one perceptron which is connected with an array of inputs, and all those inputs are weighted, means the input needs to be you can say multiplied with the corresponding weight, and then there are summed up. So the output of that weighted sum needs to be passed through a nonlinear function. Now, what is nonlinear? What is a nonlinear function, and why there is a need, that will be covered in the coming slides. And then the output of that nonlinear function can be considered to be the output of that neuron. So consider a scenario where there is a data distribution, and that data distribution needs to be, you can say, judged in the form of one decision boundary. And now, since it is a 2D type of data, so the decision boundary is to be drawn in the form of a line, right? So let's say if we consider this data distribution, is it possible to create one decision boundary in the form of a line? I think it is not possible just by using a linear discriminator. So what we need, we want to have an option to introduce nonlinearity into this. Only by using these nonlinearities, we are able to divide these two data sets with respect to each other. So these are the two different scenarios. The first one on the left hand side uses the linear activation functions, where the linear decision boundaries are produced. As you can see clearly, the linear decision boundaries are not able to handle these type of distributions, and in practically all type of applications which we handle today, the data is a non-linear in nature, means the linear decision boundaries will not help us for those cases. So there is a need in the current scenario that the data is to be passed through the weighted summation of the input needs to be passed through the non-linear functions, and those non-linear functions we consider to be the activation functions, right? So just consider one input we have taken. Let's say x1 is 3 and x2 is -2, and we take the weighted product of that, and then we sum upon, and then we pass it to a nonlinear function. Now this nonlinear function, which we call as an activation function, in most of the cases it was a sigmoid type of activation function where the output is in the form of a two-value set, that is, it can be either 0 or 1. Right. So again, since the equation which we find out after doing this weighted computation and then adding a bias is in the form of a decision boundary. So you can see that for this very simplistic case where we have only two inputs, x1 and x2, this linear decision boundary is successful. And then by using that sigmoid activation function, we can find a very simple linear decision boundary sufficient to bifurcate the data instances into two type of ways. Either the output can be considered to be 0 or it can be considered to be 1. If we extend the same scenario from one perceptron, we can extend it to two perceptron also. So what we need, that in earlier case, all the inputs needs to be connected to the one neuron itself. So if we extend this, now it can be somehow considered to be a sort of dense, means from 1 we move to 2, we can extend it to n also. So this can be considered as the onset of the extension of that single input neuron, and now we can consider it to be a multiple output perceptron. As happens in the case of single input neurons, all the inputs needs to be connected to both the perceptrons. So now instead of one, we have the two outputs, and each one have their own individual weight set also. So if we extend it further, we find that we can constitute a single layer neural network. So that single layer is considered here to be a hidden layer, because that layer is not visible directly to the output end, and the input end. So we consider it to be a sandwich between input and output. So it is hidden from the outside worlds. That's why it is called as a hidden layer. So now we have a two set of weight matrices, one connecting the input with the hidden and another set of weight matrices connecting the hidden with the final output. Right? If we extend it further, we can make more deeper networks, and more deeper network can be considered to be the onset of the development of more, you can say, deep neural networks. So from a single layer neural network, we can extend it to multi-layer neural networks, and finally the DNA deep neural networks comes into picture. So this can be considered to be the one picture for the deep layer neural network. So let's say we again move to the very simple case of a single layer neural network, and we have a input with us where x1 is, let's say, 4 and x2 is 5, and we want to find out the output of that neural network. So let's say we have not trained it, means we don't tune this with respect to the input set of conditions, and we find some output for this. For this input, output is predicted based on the nonlinear function which we have used, and let's say the predicted output is close to 0. But ideally, the ground truth says that the actual output should be 1. It means we have not predicted the true output. It is possible, and obviously it should be the case, if we have not tuned the neural network with respect to the array of possible input combinations. So why there is a difference? Because we have not tuned the weight matrices accordingly. So this deviation of the predicted value from the actual value can be considered in the form of a loss value, right? So the loss of this network measures the cost which comes from the incorrect predictions. Means if we train, if we use a network without training, obviously the predictions are much far from the actual one, and there happens to be a deviation. So we want to find out how much deviation happens, and that deviation can be constituted in the form of a loss, which is a correlation between the predicted versus the actual value. The average of all such loss values can be considered in the form of the empirical loss, means the overall loss value for the range of input combinations, and this can also be considered to be the cost function. So what our objective is, that for all these input combinations, the model should be able to learn such that now for whatever are the input combinations which are given to this in the form of a test data, it is able to predict the correct category for this. So we want to minimize this loss value. We want to minimize this empirical loss. So this is one such case where the loss is computed. The another case is in the form of a cross entropy loss, where we want to have the probability comes out in the form of 0 and 1. So in case of cross entropy loss, we use it in the form of models where we want to have the computation of the predicted. So probability distribution functions with respect to the predicted value versus the actual value. That is the correlation between them. The other comes the case of a mean squared error loss. Just like the case of fixed output in the form of a label of the class, we can have the continuous output also, which is the real input versus the real output. So here the problem is in the form of the problem can be targeted in the form of a mean squared error loss, and we normally translate this problem set in the form of a regression models, which instead of predicting the fixed values or fixed labels, they predict the continuous values. What basically we want to find out here is that we want to optimize the loss. Why there is a need to optimize the loss? Because we want to match the predicted value with the actual value. So we know that in order to minimize the loss, we have to, you can say, narrow down the gap between the actual and predicted. So that loss is basically a function of those learnable parameters. And in case of neural networks, we find that input are fixed, connections are fixed. So the only thing which we can tune or which we can learn are those weight values. So the weight values are normally randomly initialized, but just as the training proceeds, they can be tuned. So basically the objective is to map the network into such a state where those weight values have been tuned such that for whatever are the input combinations, now the predicted value tries to match with the actual value. So in case of loss optimization, consider a very simplistic case where the network is having only two weights to be considered, W0 and W1. And if we try to plot this loss landscape, we will find it is a set of few ups and downs. And the loss optimization function is such that it is, since the loss is a function of network weight, we try to find out that particular location that such that the loss value is minimized. Means we want to find out that particular location with respect to the specific weight value such that the equivalent loss comes out to be as minimal as possible. So in order to achieve that particular scenario, what we can do is that we randomly pick an initial value across this loss landscape, and then we compute the gradient at that. So gradient basically gives us the direction of that steep ascent. So we take the negative of that and then we move downward side, and then we progress this in the form of iterations, and at the end we can reach a particular location where for a fixed set of W and W2 the loss is minimized. Now here the problem is that we don't know whether that particular location in that loss landscape is a global minima or it is a local minima, right? So in order to change that convergence from the initial value to the final value, we have a one control parameter that we call in the form of a learning rate. So if you look at this pseudo algorithm, the weight updation is nothing but the initial value minus this eta that we consider to be the learning rate, and it basically changes the rate of convergence. So learning rate is that parameter which basically converges how fast the network can converge. Now choosing this learning rate is again a typical thing, because we don't know how much fast the convergence should go. Maybe we can skip the local global minima, maybe it can reach to that. So it is a sort of experimentation we can try and then achieve. Now once we as we know that for the optimization we need to find out the gradients. So just consider a very simplistic case of a neural network where there is only one input, there is one hidden neuron, and then there is one output. So we have only two weight values which we need to optimize. So in order to find out that gradient, what we have to find out? We have to find out the effect of changing those weight values such that the gradient can be optimized or gradient can be reduced. That change in loss can be optimized. So that is a sort of recursive process in which we start from the you can say right extreme end, that is from the output end, and we move towards the input. So it is a sort of chain rule which extends from the output towards the input side. First we will find out the change in the nearest weight with respect to the output, how much change we should target in that particular weight so that the output can be optimized, and then we can extend it from that side towards the input side. So it is a sort of repetitive process which happens, and this computation of gradients happens in the form of one algorithm which we call as a back propagation. If we extend this optimization of this gradient value, we can find that if we choose just one particular value on this loss landscape, we find that this process is error prone, because the whole loss landscape is not constituted just by using not constituted just of one value. So what we can do is that in order to have a better estimation, instead of just targeting this optimization with respect to one value, we can consider it to be you can say set of few data points. So this is called as batch based computation. So stochastic gradient basically pick a batch of data points and then try to optimize that thing. So this basically helps us to parallelize the whole optimization procedure, and then the training can be made more fast also. These are few of the activation functions which we use. Earlier, initially the sigmoid activation function was used, but in this case, the computation of gradient for the extremes is not possible. So nowadays, ReLU is more popularly used, because for the positive domain, it is a sort of identity function, and then the gradient function can also be targeted. So ReLU is more popular nowadays. Now, after this initial discussion, now we want to have a little bit, you can say, light towards the data pre-processing also, because data is very important in this case. So what happens if we feed the neural network with some input data? There are few prerequisites which are required. That Normally, the networks need a fixed set of inputs. So for that, a few pre-processing steps can be, you can say, needs to be accomplished. So the pre-processing steps can be in the form of a image resizing. If the data is not of a required dimension, then we need to resize that image. Then mean centering is to be done. And then the weights which we want to optimize or which we want to tune, the initialization of that weight can also be done using different strategies which are mentioned in the literature. The first one is that initialize all of them using some zeros, using some random initialization or the Xavier initialization. So these are some of the approaches which people have tried to randomly initialize those weights. After this neural networks, we move to the CNN. That why there is a need to move towards the CNN, right? So the task for the visual data is that the visual data can be in the form of the input image or in the form of a video. So let's say we have an input image and the task is to find out what it contains. So what we have to do, if we have to target in the form of a, you can say, neural network, then we have to design a neural network specifically adopted for this. So since a neural network accepts the input in the form of one dimensional, so we have to elongate this 2D array into a 1D array, and then we have to feed all those inputs to the respective perceptrons or the neurons in the single first input layer also. However, in this case, the computation which is required for doing all those optimizations is quite large. So for a better, you can say, perspective, we can use the convolution neural networks. So what are CNNs? Convolution neural networks are a special type of neural networks for processing the data, which happens to be in the form of a grid. So in case of CNNs, there are few things which basically helps us. Means there are few advantages which CNN offers. The first advantage which CNN offers is the local connectivity. In case of neural network or in case of artificial neural network, we have seen that every neuron in each layer is connected with all the possible inputs in the previous layer, right? So it has a global connectivity. In case of convolution neural networks, we have a local connectivity, right? So the local connectivity basically helps us because in this case, the computation can be optimized. So each unit is now connected only to a sub-region, means only to a patch of the input region, right? That is one thing. The other option is that the parameter sharing. The weights which we optimize, the weights remain common throughout that whole input data. So that is the parameter sharing. That is the another advantage. And then comes the pooling and subsampling. In case of neural networks, there was no pooling and subsampling happen. So the computation was quite huge. Means in terms of computation, the requirements are quite large. In case of convolution neural networks, we take the help of the pooling, where only the relevant data, most relevant to that particular case, is passed on to the subsequent layers. So if we look upon this feature extraction pipeline, because convolution neural networks are basically divided into two, you can say, regions. The first is the feature extraction, second is the classifier part. So in case of feature extraction, as I had told in the initial part of this lecture, that the feature extraction is done in a hierarchical manner. So if we take an input image, first, the low-level features are to be extracted using the initial levels. Those low-level features are then merged into the mid-level features. Basically, a little bit of complex shapes comes into a picture, and then those complex shapes further merge into a high-level feature. And those high-level features more or less basically represent the content of that particular image. So now we have a better representation. In case of the whole image, the complete data represents complete data is a multi-dimensional data, and if we reduce this data into a much lower dimensionality feature set representation, the training of the classifier can be done in an efficient manner. So if we look upon the layered structure of this convolution, then convolution neural networks consist of majorly three type of layers: the convolution, ReLU, and pool. That is for the feature extraction part, and fully connected are for the classifier. So what happens in the convolution? Convolution is nothing but a sort of dot product type of operation where we have a fixed set kernel, and that kernel is basically convolved throughout the whole input image. So it is nothing but a sort of multiply followed by some type of some operation. Other operation is the padding. Normally what happens if we convolve that fixed size filter across the input image, the output feature set which you obtain from this convolution operation is of lesser dimensions. So if you want to preserve the spatial dimension after this convolution operation, what we can do, we can pad the input image with fixed values. Normally the padding is done in the form of zeros and ones. And once we, now after this padding, if we do the convolution operation, the resultant feature map is having the same size. So this is one such example where we convolve a 6x6 image with a 3x3 filter with a stride. Now, so the stride basically tells you the advancement. That fixed size kernel once get convolved at a particular location. Now it's to be slided across that input image. And when we slide that image, by how much movement we slide it, that can be constituted or that can be termed in the form of a stride. So con 3x3 with stride 1 is means one channel, one column movement happens from left towards right with no padding. So from this way, if for an input image of 6x6, the resultant feature map is 4x4. This is another case that for a 4x4 image, if we use a padding, then the output feature map is still a 4x4 case. These are other few more examples for the feature map calculation. Now after this comes the pooling layer. So why pooling layer is needed? Because if we go on doing this convolution operations, maybe there happens to be a you can say reduction in the spatial dimension. But if we take the case of a padding, then no further spatial dimension reduction happens. So in order to target that reduction in the spatial dimension, what we can do, we can take the help of a pooling layer. So what pooling layer does is, it is a sort of downsampling operation which tries to preserve only the most relevant data from that. So if we consider this to be the input case where we have 4 2x2 you can say units in the input feature map, then in each such 2x2 units you can consider the most relevant are the maximum out of those 4 possible values. So max pool basically extract those values only and then leaves out the rest, and then we can pass this particular most relevant feature set to the next layer. Again, this is the case of a max pool for a 4x4 with results into a 2x2. And if we pass on this value, this can continue further reduction. So after this feature extraction happens, the last layer is usually a fully connected layer, which more or less resembles the artificial or the traditional neural network scenario, because now the original image has been reduced across its spatial dimensions, and now the feature set represents only the most relevant feature values. So those features can be used to train the neural network such that they can learn the category specific information from there. So that type of thing can be targeted using the fully connected layers. And at the end, in order to have a probability distribution output with respect to the input classes, we can have the softmax layer. So when we train the neural networks, there happens to be some scenarios. What happens that if the neural network is not able to map with the variations in the input data, means the mapping is not exactly happening just like the case of variations in the input data, that can be considered to be the underfitting. Means model does not have the capacity to learn from the data. The model can be very shallow in nature. The model has not that much learnable parameters. Means basically it is not able to cope with the variations in the input data. Now that input data which I am saying is the training data. That is the one such extreme in case of neural network training, that is the underfitting. The other extreme is that it perfectly maps the variations in the input data. Means the network is too complex, there are so many learnable parameters, and all those are able to map all the input changes which happens in the training data. Now these are the two extremes which we normally don't want, because we don't want underfitting to be done. We don't want overfitting to be done for the training data also, because we want the network to be generally trained. Means the network should be generalized enough that if happens there is a slight change in the training data which passes on to that some test instances also, that there happens to be a sort of similar type of changes in the test data also. Means test data is usually the unseen data. But if the network trains very well, it tries to map all the changes in the training data itself. Means it is not generalized enough. Means it is not able to cope up with the variations in the test data. So we want that the network should be trained in such a way that it is generalized enough to cope with the variations in the test data. So that is the ideal situation. Now, how to handle those underfit and overfitting scenarios? There are few regularization methods. First is that we don't want few neurons to be overpowering the training scenario. So in order to lose their supremacy, what we can do is that we want to introduce the dropout mechanism. So in dropout mechanism, what we can do is we can randomly leave few neurons during few input instances, and then for some other input instances, we can randomly leave the other few neurons. So basically, this helps us to generalize the training. Means the fixed dedicated connections which happens during the forward pass of the network, they don't become hard coded. Once we leave those neurons which are overpowering this training, the other neurons are now being left with this task of handling that input change. So that is the dropout scenario. The other is the early stopping. If we find that network is now getting overfitting, we can leave the training there itself, right? So if you can see this graph, you can find that there is an instance when the overfitting just happens, and we can leave the training at that instant only. Now there is no need to model further changes with respect to the input data. Apart from these, there is another option of batch normalization also, because in the case of the input data, we want that the data should have a zero mean and unit variance. So the data needs to be normalized also. So this is another aid which people use in the form of a layer in order to handle those, you can say, extremes of the data training part. So in case of convolution neural networks, when we train, what are the basically controllable knobs we have? That comes under the case of hyperparameter part. So in case of CNN, the controllable parameters are number of filters, filter size, stride, and the amount of padding. Okay, so when we say that we want to tune the hyperparameters of a convolution neural network, we want always to play with these things. How much should be the number of filters? Because there is no definite rule for deciding the number of filters. The more are the number of filters, the more are the chances of learning the variations, because filters are nothing but those weights which we have to find out based on the input sample variations. So that is one such case. Then comes the filter size. Basically, the filter size decides the receptive field. So filter size also takes a, you can say, deep impact in the model training. But the filter size also have a correlation with respect to the model complexity and the computation power which is needed. So that we need to take into account. Then stride and the amount of padding. So just like in the previous slide, these are the number of, you can say, parameters. So after this basic description, if we look at the history, we find that across the recent developments which happen in the CNN domain, the networks have modified their architecture and the way of feature extraction also. So I will give a brief regarding that also. So if we look upon the earliest developed convolution neural networks, the first one was the LeNet, right? So LeNet got developed in 1998. And if you look upon, LeNet is a very simple network which consists of just convolution and pooling followed by a fully connected layer set. So it was the earliest developed, you can say, convolution neural network with very simplest type of architecture. Followed by this is the LXNet. So if we compare the LeNet versus the LXNet is a much deep architecture, right? In case of LeNet, we have very few number of layers followed by the, you can say, classifier. But in case of LXNet, the network is quite deep. Even the input image which even the input image which it is able to handle, that means the input image which it is able to handle, that is also a bigger of bigger size as compared to the LeNet. So this is one such development. After this comes the VGGNet. So VGGNet we find in the literature to be more popular because VGGNet basically, you can say, was a winner for one challenge that I will show you in the coming slides. There is a one, you can say, data set. I will tell you about the data sets also, why data set is that much important. So VGGNet was a winner at that time. And in case of VGG, what is the main difference as compared to the LXNet is that in this case, you will find that the filter size which they have used, that was quite small as compared to the earlier cases. Other case, so the feature size which I was telling is that if we take a feature size of 5 by 5 filters, then the number of parameters, means the number of weight values which we need to tune, are 25, right? However, if we take, you can say, instead of just taking one filter size of 5 by 5, if we take 2 filters of 3 by 3 size, then the number of parameters which we need to learn are only 18 in nature. So in terms of computation, we are able to save few parameters, but in terms of receptive field, we can say that more or less they are looking at the same amount of data. So this was one major advantage which VGGNet offers. Then comes the GoogleNet. So GoogleNet offers one major development. So GoogleNet has one, you can say, inherent block which keep on repeating. So if you look at this architecture, you will find there is one, you can say, block which keep on repeating across this whole architecture. That block we call as the inception module. So what happens, the left side is the inception module. So what happened in case of feature extractors, earlier people were thinking that what size of filter will be more beneficial in each layer input combination. So what in the developers of GoogleNet have thought of is that let's experiment with all the possible filter sizes and then concatenate all of them. Means we don't choose ourselves where there will be a 3 by 3, where there will be a 5 by 5. Let's start with feature extraction with all the possible filter sizes and then concatenate them and let the model choose which is the best one out of that. So this was the major, you can say, advancement in case of inception. Then comes the residual network. So what happens, earlier people have been thinking that if we keep on adding the deep layers in the network, then the model will try to learn in a better manner. Means as we have more layers to train, model will be able to grasp more amount of data variation. Now model will be able to cope up with more amount of data changes also. So model is able to learn better also. But actually it was not a scenario. Practically people have tried and find out that after 50 or so layers, if they increase the number of layers, model was not able to better perform. In fact, it performs in a, you can say, bad manner as compared to a much shallower network. Why it happens? Because if we make a network to be deep enough, then the gradient which needs to be passed from the output towards input, they will also keep on diminishing. So it is considered to be a vanishing gradient problem. If we take the network to be quite deep in nature, then those gradients will not be able to propagate from the output towards the input. So if we are not able to propagate the gradients from output towards the input end, then we will not be able to tune those weights also. So this was the reason. So at least it was thought that let's consider of a situation where a deeper network was able to at least behave in a similar manner as like the case of a shallower network. So for that, identity mapping was done. So this was the major advancement in case of residual network, that in one pass was the normal feature extraction pass, and then there is a bypass connection happens from the input towards the output side. So it basically helps us to have that at least delta mapping which happens in the case of feature extract along with that identity mapping. This was the case of the advantage in the case of forward pass. Now in the backward pass, the same bypass path which we have done in this case, that bypass path basically helps us to propagate those gradients directly from the output towards the input. So it was a major advancement which happens in 2015, and it was a major winner also in almost all of the changes. So ResNet was initially developed for around 34 layer deeper network, then extended to 50, then more than 150 also. So these are the few of the architectures which have been made, you can say, in the recent history. Now, in terms of the network performance, we want if we want to evaluate the network performance, then that performance is to be evaluated in the form of accuracy measures. So the accuracy measures are in the form of the class metrics. So one such class metric is IOU, one such class metric is F1 score. So intersection of union, mean, average, precision, depending upon the type of task which we will target, such type of metrics will be used to find out the efficiency of a network. So the data which we will use to feed a network has a very important role in training the network. Now the data which we have is limited in size. Okay, we can't have an abundant amount of data with respect to the categories which are present in that. So in order to handle that scarcity of the data, what we usually do is we will target the augmentation method. So data augmentation is a very important pre-processing step. So in data augmentation, what we usually do, we will perform few of the transformation operations on the input in the form of flipping, cropping, sharing, zooming. All these basically present the different views of the input to the feature extractor, and then model will try to evolve based on these variations. So, okay, so this is just the repetition part, right? So what we can do if we want to have the improvement in case of CNN, the general thing is that we remove the redundant features. So redundancy is obviously targeted in the feature extraction part. Perform hyperparameter tuning, means I told you in case of convolution layers that what are the hyperparameters. So we can target by tuning those hyperparameters. Then the third option, which is the most relevant one, is the search for pre-trained models which are trained on images similar to this dataset. Why this is relevant option? Because in case of a convolution neural network, the initial layers are responsible for the extraction of the elementary features, low-level features. And irrespective of the class of the data, elementary features are more or less similar. So if we have a network which has been trained on a huge data set, then we can use that knowledge to extract the elementary features, and then the you can say add-on layers, means the last layers of that can be, you can say, tuned with respect to that particular data set. So along with the training, sometimes we also want to find out whether the model is getting trained from the relevant content of the input image or not. Means at some locations we find that model is trained very efficiently. Even for the test cases also it is giving quite good results. But we want to ensure whether model is looking at the correct region of the input image or not. Because if we train a model blindly without even considering this factor that model is looking at the correct region, we may find a situation where the model performs in a bad manner. And that happens because model was not looking at the correct region of that input image. So for that, the aid comes in the form of a visualization. So visualization generally happens in the form of a layered structure, that is the general visualization, which basically gives the architecture of the model, that how that model consists of in terms of the different layers. The second one are the activations. So activations are the most important things, because activations basically gives you a glimpse of those regions from where the feature extraction happens. Okay. So it can be targeted in the form of a class activation maps. So class activation maps layer wise will basically tell you those regions from where the feature extraction is being targeted. So if you find that the model is now looking at the correct regions, obviously the model is getting trained in a, you can say, legitimate manner. If the model is getting trained by looking at a different region than the respective object location, maybe you will find yourself in a you can say difficult situation if you test it for some unknown scenarios. So I think we can leave this part. Okay, so the different data sets which we can use for the training are means the open source data sets which we can initially use for the training of the models. The more general ones are the first one is the MNIST data set, which we usually start experimenting with. It is a digit data set. It is a sort of binary type of image type of data set. If you move to the color data set, the first one which comes into picture is the CIFAR data set, which is a color data set having 10 classes in all. But the majority of the deep learning models which we train with always train from a huge data set which we call as a ImageNet data set. So it is a very big data set which is a huge collection of images, and approximately 1,000 classes are present in that data set. So if we train a model from this data set, we can expect that the model has seen so much variations in the input class which are possible in the real nature. So for practical applications, the advisable is the ImageNet type of data set. So this slide is just to give a glimpse of the diversity of data which is present in the ImageNet. For even one class also, you have a intra-class variation, and the data set is you can say the data set can be used for an array of tasks like image classification, localization, object detection. So it is suited for a different purposes of computer vision problems. Now, once we have the data set, we have the architecture with us, we have everything in place. Now what we have to do, we have to train the model. So when we train a model, we have two scenarios. The first thing is to train the model from scratch. From scratch means now the model is designed, its weights have been initialized in a random manner or initialized with 0, and whatever the tuning happens, that happens with the present data only. That is the training from the scratch. Okay. In some cases, it is okay. We can get for the shallower models, we can expect that this happens to be a good option. But for the deeper models, it is normally it is advised to avoid such type of training. So the other option is the transfer learning or fine tuning of a model. So as I told earlier also, in case of fine tuning, what we usually do is transfer learning, as the name itself specifies, transfer of learning. So transfer of learning means the feature extraction knowledge which the model has developed, means a deeper network is already there. The feature extraction knowledge which the model has developed by looking at a more enhanced or more wide data set, that knowledge can be transferred to a network which is having now a presence of a very less amount of data. So it can be targeted in two ways. The first one is, let's say we have a scenario where the pre-trained model is trained on ImageNet data set. That is the, you can say, sort of the reference data, reference model. And the one scenario is if your data is far different from the ImageNet data, means ImageNet data is having although 1,000 classes in this, but let's say you want to train a model for a scenario where you have data which is not even relevant to those 1,000 classes, then in that case also you can use the transfer learning. What you can do is fix the lower CNN layers and train higher CNN layers and fully connected layers. So in that case also what we can do is we can fix the lower CNN layers. We don't use them for the training, but we train the higher CNN layers. We can still transfer the knowledge even if the data is not relevant. The more you can say healthier option is that if our data is similar to the ImageNet. So if our data is similar to the ImageNet, then we can fix all the CNN layers. There is no need to have the feature extraction of all that because data is already similar. Already the feature extraction happens with the ImageNet data. You can continue using that part and just need to train the fully connected layers. So fully connected layers needs to be trained based on the feature which you are now extracting for your input data, and then the classification can be made accordingly. So it is quite fast in nature also. This is one such instance where we have used the, you can say, one pre-trained network for, you can say, training on a very less amount of data, which is a flower data set. So after all these things, the task which we want to target by training a network, by doing this data augmentation, by all this hyperparameter tuning on that, what are the tasks which we can target? The simplest of them is called the image classification. I told in the initial slide also, image classification means we have a set of input images and we want to classify those images into the possible categories, right? So we expect the model to give us a class label for this. That is one very simple case, but normally image classification is not to be used in a practical scenario. The desired ones are extended versions of those. So the case study which we can consider is the object detection case study. Let's say we have a pedestrian detection system and we have a camera installed in our car, and that camera will capture the image of the outward scene. So the outward scene consists of few pedestrians. There are few traffic signs also, and we want to identify whether we should go or no go, and if we have to go, from which direction we should go. So that is the object detection problem. We want to detect those pedestrians so as to find out our desired pathway. So the first way, the first, you can say the first approach to solve this problem is a very rudimentary approach. What we can do is we can divide the input image. Any image can be divided into, this is a rectangular image, we divide it into 4 possible regions of this, and then pass each possible region to the image classifier, which tells us whether there is a pedestrian present in that image or not. That is one rudimentary way. It can serve as a purpose, but the exact location of that pedestrian is still not clear. So now we extend that divide conquer approach. What we can do, we improve upon it and exponentially increase the number of patches, right? From any particular region, we can increase the number of patches, and then we, for each patch, we can find out whether the object is present in that system, in that patch or not, and then we can find out the location. It serves the purpose, but in this case, the number of patches which we have to handle are quite large. So we can means leave this option also. The third option which comes to us is that, is it possible that we can, just like the first case, we have divided the image into 4 regions, we extend that, now we divide the image into a grid fashion. Let's say we divide the image into a 10 by 10 grid. And for each grid, we want to estimate, we extract a patch by looking at the center of that grid, we extract a patch from there, and we try to find out whether that patch is having the object or the pedestrian in that or not. So it is somehow acceptable, because in this case you need not have to process that much large number of patches, which earlier you are processing in case of approach 2. But it is still not, you can say, useful one, because the patch which you extract from a specific grid may not contain the whole pedestrian in that. So now we move to the fourth one, and that is the most efficient, and in fact that is the same approach which we use in the object detection algorithms also. What we will do is we will increase the grid size. So instead of grid size as 10, let's say we increase it to 20. So now we have more such centroid locations. In each such centroid location, we can experiment with different patch sizes also, because we don't know that the object fit in which patch. So now we have two things: we increase the number of grid regions, and we increase the number of possible patches also. All these possibles in object detection algorithms, all these patches basically can be considered as the anchor boxes. Depending upon the type of object, we can have different aspect ratio for these patches also. So now it comes to be a, you can say, acceptable solution, because now we can easily find out the location of that particular object, and we can estimate the exact, you can say, boundary box also for that. So if we, instead of doing this thing manually, if we do this in the form of an algorithm, we can use the deep learning algorithms, and the deep learning algorithms basically do the same type of thing. How they target it, I will explain in the coming slides. So the first thing which we have expected from that grid formation is that, are we able to find out the possible regions where there might be the occurrence of an object or not, right? So we have to find those regions in an input image where there might be an object. We don't want to now form the grid out of that. We just want to find out the possible regions. So region proposals first needs to be made. Now for region proposal, there are few algorithms in literature. The first one which we generally target upon is the selective search algorithm. So selective search algorithm is a bottom up approach, where we start from one random selected point and we try to find out, you can say, its analogy with respect to the neighbors. We form a sort of clustering into that, and at the end we merge those clusters, neighboring clusters, into each other, and finally we have the coarse clusters left out, and then we draw a bounding box over them, and then we propose those bounding box as the regions where there might be an object present. But what happens, the number of proposals in this case are quite large. So we extend this to the, you can say, object detection approaches. And the first object detection approach which comes in the literature was a RCNN, that is region-based CNN, because CNN basically looks upon the feature extraction part. From which region we want to extract the features, that is to be decided by us. Okay. So we pass the input image to the selective search algorithm. Selective search algorithm will extract the different region proposals. And in all of those region proposals, we do a sort of warping. Warping means you can say transforming all those regions into a fixed square size, because the convolution neural network accept a fixed size input. So after warping of those region proposals, we pass it to the feature extractor, which can be a pre-trained model just like a VGG or an AlexNet. And after this feature extraction, we can have a classifier also. If we don't use the fully connected layers at the end, we can use this for the just feature extraction part, and then at the end we can use the classifier. So this was the initial thing which got developed in the form of a region-based convolution neural network. But in this case, the problem is that the whole pipeline consists of three distinct models. The first one is that you have to have a selective search. The second one is you have to have a, you can say, feature extractor. Then you have to have a classifier also. And along with the classifier, you need to adjust the bounding box location also. So means there is a regression problem also associated with this, where you have to fine tune the position of those bounding boxes also, right? So this whole process is quite time consuming, because we have separate models to train, and then this is quite time consuming and resource intensive also. So these are some of the, you can say, results which comes out based on the Pascal VOC data set. I will tell you fast RCNN later on, but just for the comparison, I can say that the region-based CNN got trained in around 84 hours. However, fast RCNN got trained in around 9.5 hours. So there is a speed up happens around 146 times. Now, what happens in case of fast RCNN? Just leave this part. This is just a comparison. Okay. Yeah, sorry. So what happens in case of fast RCNN? Remember, I told you that in case of region-based CNN, we have the range of region proposals, and for each region proposal, we have to do the feature extraction. Now, if we have around 2000 region proposal, for each region proposal, if we do the feature extraction, this process has become quite, you can say, computationally expensive as well. Time also it needs for the computation. So in case of fast RCNN, what they have done, they pass the whole input image in one go through that CNN network for the feature extraction, and then they selectively choose based on that region which got proposed. They selectively choose from that feature set corresponding to that region proposal which has been made by the selective search. So instead of doing the feature extraction for those 2000 proposals, now you have to do the feature extraction one time only. So this basically saves us you a quite long, large amount of computation. So this was the advancement which was done in. This was the advancement which was done in case of fast RCNN, but still there is one bottleneck which remains in case of fast RCNN, that is the region proposal part.
ये 345 को खत्म होता है 255 to 350 खत्म होता है.
Okay, so now comes the final of those faster region-based convolution neural networks. In case of fast RCNN also, we have to use the region proposals from the selective search. So in case of faster RCNN, what they have thought is that can't we use the same feature maps which we extracted in case of fast RCNN, and then just slide a fully convoluted layer across that in order to find the region proposals from there? Means just we use only one convolution neural network, and that convolution neural network extracted feature set is now used for the ROI part as well as used for the region proposal part. So this was the major advancement which happens in the case of faster RCNN, and now they are able to train the model in quite less resources, as well as the training as well as the testing time also got improved considerably. The other class of object detection algorithms comes under the case of the you can say the region-based CNN basically works upon the region proposals, right? So if we don't have the region proposals, what we can do, this is sort of an analogy with respect to the grid type of formation which we have done in the case of case study. So in case of YOLO, as well as there is one single shot detector also. What happens? There are the class of algorithms basically which don't depend upon the region proposals. So what they do is that they will divide the input image into a fixed set grid, right? And for each grid location, they will try to estimate the objectness score out of that, whether there is a presence of that object or not, and the probability also of the the bounding box coordinates. So for each grid location, you have a set of anchors, and for all those anchors, you will find the objectness score as well as the bounding box coordinate. So basically how this model works, it will look upon the input image in one go and then try to find out the possibilities of the object locations as well as their categories, class categories. So there is now no need to have the region proposals. So just in one go, you are able to extract both the object locations as well as the class scores also. So that's why this model was more suited to the real-time applications as compared to the faster RCM. Now, up to object detection, what we have done is that the image is now got translated into uniquely defined regions, and for each region we have the class label associated with it. But is it possible to extend it further with respect to the constituent pixels also? That comes under the category of semantic segmentation. So in semantic segmentation, what we can do is that in semantic segmentation, we can assign a class label, or we will assign a class label to each individual pixel, not to the bounding box, but to each individual pixel, to which category that pixel belongs, right? So this comes under the case of semantic segmentation. So semantic segmentation basically first got targeted using fully convolution networks, because if we take the help of the padding structure, then we know that the feature map which we obtained after the convolution operation is of same size. So if we just take a fully convolution neural network, and at the end whatever the feature map which we obtained, that can be translated into a sort of a mask for each class, and all those masks can be combined, and the resultant output can be visualized in the form of a segmentation, where each pixel is assigned its individual color, and that color denotes that particular class. But in this case, if we look upon this, we will find there is a huge amount of convolution computation involved, because we want to preserve the same feature map size. So for that, what can be done? We can use an encoder-decoder type of approach, where first the downsampling happens in the case of feature extraction, then takes the case of the upsampling. So this case of encoder-decoder type of architecture basically helps us to reduce the number of computations, as well as the you can say as well as the semantic boundaries which we obtain are also you can say precisely defined. But in this case, in order to have a more precise boundary definition, because if we just reduce the feature to very low dimension, then we will use that semantic relation across the spatial dimensions. So in order to attain that, what we can do is that we want to have a correlation from the decoder to the encoder side. So the same thing happens in the case of the another advancement, which is the SegNet case. So we want to correlate the corresponding pairs of the downsampling as well as the upsampling. So what we basically do is that in case of max pooling, we just take the most relevant value from that feature map region. If we have that particular max pool location with us, then we can for the upsampling part, we can just transfer that you can say particular feature to its respective original location. So that spatial hierarchy is now preserved in the upsampling process. So this was the you can say improvement which happens in the case of SegNet. The similar type of you can say improvement happens in the case of U-Net also, which was majorly designed for the medical segmentation problem. So we have to have a correlation between the upsampling as well as the downsampling. We correlate and then we find out. Now the object detection pipeline which we have discussed is further extended into the segmentation problem. So what they have done, they have just added a parallel branch to the object detection. So we have seen in the case of semantic segmentation, they started with the fully convolution networks. So the same type of fully convolution networks, we can use it here in the case of the same faster RCNN pipeline. And that fully convolution network basically gives you the you can say binary sort of decision for every pixel, whether that pixel belongs to that category or not. And for each pixel, if we have a sort of binary type of distribution, we can, you can say, combine all those distributions, and at the end we can have the mask formation for a particular category also. And this way it can be extended to other categories. And finally, we have the mask information. So this major extension happens from the object detection to the semantic segmentation using just one parallel branch addition, and this architecture we call as a mask RCNN. Right. So these are now this is the whole you can say description regarding the different deep learning architectures, different methodologies related to the training, how to make your network train faster, what are the different bottlenecks, and all those descriptions we have accomplished in this. Now a little of the time, just 4 to 5 minutes, I will try to give for these few technologies on which we have worked, so as to give you a glimpse what type of problems you can also target upon in the practical scenario. So if you look upon the first image which comes on the top left side is the image which I have shown in the case of computer vision problem set also. So basically here in this project, what we have done is that we have targeted the elderly care problem. So in elderly care problem, what is the need is that in the current societal scenario, people are living alone, means the parents are living at a separate location, children are at a different location. So how to take care of the elderly in an efficient manner? Now, in a living room, if we take the image from a camera, the camera has a fixed field of view, right? So we have to install multiple cameras in order to have the efficient or the complete picture of the complete living room. So what we have done, we have taken the fisheye lens and then use a full 360-degree camera, which is installed in a downward facing direction from the ceiling. And then we capture the view from top towards bottom, is from up towards the floor side, we capture the view. And then the model was trained in order to identify whether there happens to be any, you can say, problem with the living person or not. So what can be the problem? The problem can be the falling of the person. He's not able to change his posture after some time. So in order to preserve the privacy in this particular project, what we have done is that we don't transmit the image data as such. What we done is that at the same location, the onboard processing is done, and whenever there happens to be some mishappening with the parent, then at that particular location only the information is going to be sent. Now the extension of this project happens to be soon, and you can see on the right hand extreme of this. So on the right hand extreme, we will find that if you can say the care person wants to visually you can say visually ascertain also that whether there is a real problem happening with the parent or not. So for that we can use a different type of you can say camera that can be considered to be the sort of IR camera, where the identity of the person is preserved, and in fact we are not able to clearly identify the image content also, but the model is intelligently trained to identify whether some problem happens or not. So this was a IR camera, that one was a 360-degree camera. The middle part of the you can say slide consists of one project where we have worked on a medical domain, right? So in this, what we have done is that the dentist, if we visit to dentist, what the problem they usually face is that the mouth cavity is having a very limited you can say region in which you can operate upon. If they normally visualize the mouth cavity through one mirror. So what we have done is that we as humans are able to visualize the surroundings in a 3D domain, right? So 3D domain basically helps us to estimate the position of one object with respect to another object. So in this project, what we have done is that we have obtained the 3D view of the complete mouth cavity along with all the necessary database creation and everything. That is the secondary part. We have created the complete 3D view, that too in real time, just by using one camera data only. So now by looking at his monitor, the dentist is now able to exactly identify the different, you can say, toothache problems, and then he is able to estimate also whether there happens to be any progress in that part or not. So this was one such thing. The extension of that project was also done in the form of the oral screening purpose, where based on the fluoroluminescence, we can find out whether there happens any where there happens any cancerous growth in that also. So the data is analyzed, and then it is then we are able to find out whether there is a sort of some you can say cancerous growth in mouth cavity or not. So this was one such project. The next slide also includes a few of the demonstrations with respect to the projects. So the first slide, image which you can see on the top left side is a project which we consider under the category of structural health monitoring. So in structural health monitoring, the major problem comes is that we want to train a model for a scenario for which data is not present, right? Because in structural health monitoring, where we have to work with either those you can say structures which are quite old in nature. They can be heritage buildings, they can be old bridges which are still functional in use. So the problem comes, are there any chances of their collapse? Are there any chances that their future life will be, you can say, hampered very severely if they continue to be used in the current manner for long? So for that, the problem is that we don't have the data for those damage scenarios. Means normally the healthy data is available because that bridge is still in use, so we can get the healthy data. So the task is to train a model, or task is to identify those instances from the healthy data itself, which basically corresponds to the deviation in the healthy scenario, right? So what we have done is we have tried to find those specific you can say parameters from those healthy data instances, which basically tells us you to estimate that model. The model will try to estimate whether there happens to be a deviate in the normal functioning or not, and if there happens to be any deviate, then can that deviate be considered as a faulty scenario or not, and up to how much scale we can consider that to be a faulty scenario. So this was one such project. This was targeted using contact-based sensors, and that is the vibration sensors. The other project which we have targeted for the same type of application, that is the non-contact based sensors, we have tried to estimate, you can say, based on the vibrations, using a high-speed camera, we try to estimate the vibrations which happens in a non-invasive manner from a distance. We estimate whether those vibrations can be considered to be in, you can say, healthy manner, or can be considered in the faulty manner. These are the two projects related to the structural health domain. The middle top one image is the project which we have targeted for the drone-based type of applications. So it was, you can say, defense-related project, where what we have done is that we have been asked that can it be made possible to reduce the patrolling instances. So what we have done is that we have been given few image instances, and the task is to identify whether some of the prohibited things happen in those image or the video sequences. What are those prohibited sequences? Whether there is a group of people which need not to be present in group at those particular time instances, whether there are the few class of animals are not there, whether some vehicle is parked on it, how that vehicle is monitoring. So there are few class of boundary conditions which have been defined, and for those conditions we have trained our model and we identify those instances, and based on those instances we can generate some alarm type of behavior. The one thing which you can see on the bottom left side is again a security related project, where what we have done is that if we normally travel through the aeroplanes, there is a security screening which happens at the airport, and in that security screening, what is usually done is that our baggage is usually passed through the X-ray scanner, and then the image of that X-ray scanner goes to the security person, and then that security person basically identifies the content of that X-ray image, whether there is some dangerous type of object present in that image or not, right? So for that, what we have done is that now we can think of that, okay, this is a very simple thing. The person is trained, so he can easily do that thing. But the problem comes when that person is asked to do the same type of thing for repetitive number of durations. Means if we ask ourselves to do a monotonous type of task, then probably we lose our interest after some time. And in normal day-to-day scenario, it is not a harmful thing. But in case of security-related application, even if we lose the interest, if we lose the focus for just one minute instance, it may lead to some catastrophic incidences. So for that to be avoided, what we have done is that we thought that the initial screening, let it be done through the algorithm part. So what we have done, we have taken the data from the baggage scanners, and then we have tried to find out those instances both in a normal way as well as in a cluttered way as well as in a partial way, and whether there is a correlation between those shapes versus the normal instances of other objects also. So we have tried to cover different instances. We have also generated few synthetic images also, so as to find out whether other possibilities can also be imaged, because getting an X-ray image from a baggage scanner is difficult, and since it is a security related problem, normally such instances are not easily available. So we have trained the models for those instances, and we are now able to identify the you can say threat type of object instances, and for those instances their alarm can be triggered, and then the secondary analysis can be done by the security person. So this is one such project. The bottom right project is again related for the heritage preservation. It was done for a heritage site. We all know there is one heritage site in with the name Hampi, and the task is to create the digital archive of that, so that that archive can be saved, and then the current state of that can be preserved for the future generations. So through the virtual reality type of AD devices, now we can even share the data with anyone without any need to go to that place, and you can say allowing the visitors to those locations basically prone those heritage structures to damage also. So this was for that purpose. Yeah, I think this is all from my side. So now I'm open for the questions if you have any.
Thank you, sir. One knowledgeable session. Participant, if you have any query, please ask.
I have covered actually in a little bit faster manner, because I thought that I shall cover the end-to-end thing. So maybe the content was large, but I covered them in a little bit faster manner. So if anything is still you consider difficult to be understood, maybe we can discuss that. Or if you have some any other doubt also, that we can discuss. Means choice is yours only.
Dheeraj sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, there are multiple networks are available. So how to select particular networks for the applications?
There are
Like VGG, Google, and there are particular networks are available. So how to select a particular a good one for the applications? So
okay.
which are the criteria that we need to focus on?
Okay. So you are asking about the selection of networks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so actually when we select a network, there are two things which we have to look upon. The first thing is that, are we looking just at the training part, or the training as well as testing? And in case of testing, where we are going to run that model, right? So the first thing comes in the terms of the computational needs of a model. If we select a model which is quite deep in nature and we don't have the computation resources, it will not be able to get trained also, right? And if we use the same type of model for the testing, then in case of testing also it will be a problem. So normally the first thing which we have to consider is that whether the computation resources which are available at our end, they are able to train the model based on the available data instances, because a model needs to be trained on a data instances, and the training is need to be done in the form of batches. So whether the computation resources are able to handle that much large batch instances or not, because the computational resources needs to accumulate all those feature set extractions and all that. So that is the first and primemost thing which we have to look upon by choosing a model. That is one thing. The second thing is that, can we use a transfer learning based type of approach? Means if we can use a transfer learning based type of approach, then I think any model which get trained earlier on a bigger data set can serve the purpose.
Okay, sir. And one more question, sir. That in deep learning, everything that is hidden, right? So we just give the input and the rest of the thing that is done by the neurons. So how we can like inform to the students as well as inform to the end users that the working of the particular things?
Okay, so you probably mean to say that since we just give the inputs and we obtain the outputs, and we don't have any control knobs in between through which we can decide
Right.
what is happening in between.
So in machine learning, like if we consider the machine learning part, then we have our own features detection techniques, right? Or feature selection techniques. That is not in the deep learning. So it is already decided by the network itself, right? So like how we can inform students that these are the process that is happening and in which way we can change it out so that the output gets changed.
So it is true that in deep learning, the feature extraction takes place intuitively, means the model, if passed upon the data instances, the feature extraction happens in the form of, you can say, iterative manner. But it's not like that. You are not able to control or not visualize what is happening in between. There are few ways by which you can visualize what type of features model is looking upon, what type of features model is extracting, from which layer what type of information is getting extracted. I think I have covered visualizing the CNN part in this lecture, and then using activation map type of thing, you are able to visualize what type of features model is extracting, and then whether those features correctly represent the particular object or not. Maybe the image, maybe the feature extraction is done from a different region of the image than the expected one. So those things basically helps you to control the training part. Now, in terms of what type of feature, there are ways by which you can control those things also, depending upon some fine-tuning approaches, depending upon the network pruning approaches also. You can control that part also, whether you want to go ahead with this feature set or you want to control it in the form of layer removal and all those things. So there are ways by which you can do something with the architecture also. If you are not happy with that feature extraction, you can visualize that also, you can trim it out also, you can extend it also. So there are ways. But the advantage in this case is that as compared to the machine learning is that in machine learning, you need to have the domain knowledge. Okay, so without the domain knowledge, you are not able to extract the task specific features. Just like if you take the case of a face detection type of problem, in case of face detection problem, the earlier one, the most popular algorithm was the Euler-Jones algorithm. So what they have done is that they have looked upon the faces and then they have to find the specific ways by which those face specific features can be extracted. And then they hard coded those ways. So unless and until you have that particular domain specific knowledge, machine learning approaches can't be extended. However, in case of deep learning approaches, since the data itself make the model to get trained, you need not have to worry about that thing. Means although it is blind, but it is not that much blind, and it is helping you in training its relevant features also.
Okay. Right, sir. But the thing is, in deep learning, there are a number of hidden layers. So in that hidden layer, what would be the threshold that we can consider, and that might be the according to the applications, right? So
Actually, in deep learning, threshold is not there. What we have is that we have the number of filters, that is one such thing. We have the
okay.
number of layers, that is one such thing. Then the stride, then the learning rate. So there are few set of hyperparameters. So those hyperparameters have an impact on the model training scenario also. Okay, and there are few regularization methods which we have discussed. So all these in combination decides the way how a network is getting trained. That even if the default architecture is preserved, you have a way to control all those things. So means you need not have to manually tweak all those connections.
Right,
Basically,
but how
what
we
you
can
want,
decide, sir, that how we can decide the number of hidden layers?
the number of hidden layers depends upon the type of task which you want to target. Maybe the task is very much naive in nature. You don't need a deep neural network for that. Even a simple two-layer shallow network can serve your purpose. So there is no, you can say, guideline for this, that you choose this particular architecture for this particular problem. But what people usually do is that if the task is not very much you can say critical enough, then even the shallow networks can help. Even for the shallow networks, they can play with the layer structure, they can play with the filter size, they can play with the number of filters also, and then they can get the similar type of performance which they intend to get from a deeper network.
Okay. And sir, one more drawback of deep learning is training time, the consumption of training time. So how we can overcome that and minimize that?
So the training time can be easily targeted using two ways. The first thing is that use a shallow network if it suits you, means the most obvious solution. If it is not possible to target or use a shallow network, you have to use a deeper network, then always go for the transfer learning approach, because in transfer learning usually we don't go for end-to-end training. We normally freeze the initial layers where the low level or mid level feature extraction take place, and then we train the you can say consecutive levels, which are task specific feature extractions. So in this case, the training will not take that much time because earlier layers have already been trained. Their weights have already been optimized.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sir, I have one question. So like you said, we can use transfer learning. Sir, can we use transfer learning if the data set that I want to use is not having any ground truth available? Is it
Actually,
possible?
the data set, the data set which you have must have a ground truth because it is a supervised learning approach. So in case of supervised learning approach, for whatever the data instances, the model have to have the reference values, and those reference values are the ground truths. Now in transfer learning, what you have is that you have this set of layers with you which are trained to extract the elementary features, right? That is the only thing which is made available to you. Now that is a huge computation which is now made free of cost. But for a task to get targeted, you must have the ground truth available with you, because without that you are not able to correlate which data instance belongs to which category.
Okay.
Only
So
then you can
help?
find out. See, try to understand the situation. The optimization
yes,
is the optimization of loss landscape. So the loss landscapes basically gives you the margin between the predicted versus the actual value. So the actual value is the reference value. So without that actual value, you will not be able to predict how much deviation you are having with the current data set.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So, sir,
Excuse me,
can you
participant.
suggest any tools which are freely available for getting the ground truth images? Because
Excuse me.
I have searched for only yes, sir.
Actually, we have one session of Dheeraj sir at 3 o'clock. So is it possible? Can we discuss at 3 o'clock at the session?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. So
So
Dheeraj sir will be joining us again today.
Yeah, at 3 o'clock.
Okay. Yes, sir. It's possible. Thank you.
Right?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. One thing, we have shared a feedback form in the chat box. So it's requested to all participants that please fill that form. And one more thing.
And Neetu, you please ask this question in the you can say lab session, and I will answer this at that moment itself.
Yes, sir. Definitely, sir.
Requested to all that please switch on your camera so that we can click some photographs. Participants and Dheeraj sir. Okay, thank you all.
For in attendance, it will be captured automatically.
Sorry, sir.
For attendance
Yes,
of
sir.
the session.
Yeah, attendance will be captured automatically from MS Team.
जिंदगी में पेशेंस नाम की चीज बहुत जरूरी होती है.
Our next session will start at 12:45.
वो ध्यान है ना मेरे को.
Thank you all. please join the session at 12:45 with the same link.
कुछ urgent काम है तो
Subin sir, shall I leave?
Sure, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
See you in the next session, sir. Thank you very much.